I like Monopoly. I'm not a Monopoly super fan or anything, but if someone asked me if I wanted to play a game, I'd probably say yes, as opposed to many people's reactions, which are more typically along the lines of... I was recently watching a series by a YouTuber called Massacre's Mansion, in which he had combined every single version of Uno, a project that he called the Uno Amalgam. And as I was watching it, I thought, could you do this with Monopoly? I mean, there have been probably hundreds, if not thousands, of different Monopoly versions, so could you feasibly combine all of them into one game? That's what I aim to figure out today, and the probably dozen or so other videos that I'm gonna make after this one, as I create the Amalgopoly. It's like amalgam and monopoly, so it's like a portmanteau of the two words, and it combines it together. By the way, I want to give an absolutely massive shout out to Massacre's Mansion for inspiring this project. If you're a fan of the kind of stuff that I do in this video, then you should go check out his series, the Uno Amalgam, to which there is a link in the description for it. Plus, if enough people go watch his video because of this video, then he might not get mad at me for completely ripping off his idea and the name. So if we're gonna make this thing, we'll need a plan of attack. So I've divided the making of the Amalgopoly into three main phases. Phase 1 is what I'm calling the throwing spaghetti at the wall phase. This is where we look through different versions of Monopoly, pull out rules and mechanics that we can use and that are different from normal Monopoly, and chuck it all into one massive, unorganized document. Phase 2 is scraping all of that spaghetti off the wall and trying to make a decent meal with it. This is where we'll have to ask questions like, how do we arrange the board? What mechanics can we combine? Do we have enough properties? Does the game take too long? What's the number for my therapist again? You know, stuff like that. And phase 3 will be plating up the spaghetti and providing it to the consumer. This will be me trying to make a version of the game that you can actually play. Yes, you, the viewer. Unless nobody watches this series, in which case I'm not going to make anything. I'm not really sure how I'm going to do this yet. I think a physical version of the game could be really cool, but also probably really complicated and expensive to make, so I'm not sure if that's really feasible. Now, as we begin phase 1, we're going to need some rules and guidelines when it comes to combining different monopolies to help guide us. The first rule is what I will be calling the universal rule, and it is the most important rule and can never, ever be violated. The universal rule is as follows. The game will only end when all but one player has gone bankrupt. Nearly every single version of Monopoly, aside from the original, tries to add some kind of cop-out win condition because the absolute wusses over at Hasbro can't handle a game that lasts more than 20 minutes. But no matter how many games we add with any number of victory conditions, I ain't budging on this rule. It's the cornerstone of Monopoly, last man standing, and I'm not gonna let players chicken out just because the Jackrabbit Jimothy Monopoly said the game ends whenever someone complains the game is taking too long. It was weirdly sassy of me. The second rule is that we're only going to be adding versions of Monopoly that actually change something about the game. There's a lot of different versions of Monopoly where all they do is they just say, hey, it's that one thing from pop culture, and they change the property names, and that's pretty much it. We can't really add those because there's just nothing to add. The third rule is that we're going to be trying to mostly add mechanics, not really replace mechanics, and really try to not remove any mechanics unless absolutely necessary. Here's an example of what I mean. In Miss Monopoly, they replace railroads with ride shares, but they function completely differently to railroads. You can't buy them, you just go to the next ride share. But when we add Miss Monopoly to the Amalgopoly, we won't be replacing the railroads with ride shares. We'll be keeping the railroads, but also adding the ride shares, so therefore, we get the spaces for both games without compromising anything. Does that make sense? Probably, maybe, hopefully, good, awesome. I think the only time I'd really ever replace a mechanic is if it's more of a natural expansion of a previous mechanic as opposed to a completely new thing that just replaces what was already there. The fourth rule is that no matter how dumb a mechanic is, we have to add it. We're going to be covering a lot of different versions of Monopoly, which means we'll be coming across a lot of utterly idiotic ideas and mechanics. And as easy as it would be to just say, this mechanic is stupid and would probably only make the game worse, that's not what we're here to do. I'm not here to make a good game. I'm here to push game design to its limits and see if this monstrosity can stand on its own 2 feet. So, if something is an official mechanic in an official version of Monopoly, we have to add it. Unless it, completely breaks the game and basically makes it unplayable. In which case, I'm probably not going to add that. I don't care about game design, but with an asterisk saying I'd like the game to at least be kinda playable. The 5th rule is less of a rule and more of a guideline, which is that we are building off of the standard version of Monopoly. Although we'll be adding and changing a lot about the game, it's important to keep in mind that we're trying to make a version of Monopoly. There's a pretty decent chance that after all this is done, it'll be a Ship of Theseus situation where we've changed so much about the game that it's not even the same game at this point, but I can at least try to keep certain central mechanics. You move by rolling the dice, you buy properties with these, Monopodollars. Yeah, that's what we'll call them. And of course,
the universal rule.
And I know the perfect first game to add to the Amalgopoly. It will be Monopoly. Just normal Monopoly. As I stated before, Monopoly will be our base, which we will be adding the other games to, so I think it's important to talk about where we're starting from. Monopoly has a total of 40 spaces, consisting of 22 standard property spaces, 2 utilities, 4 railroads, 3 chance spaces, 3 community chest spaces, 2 tax spaces, the go space, the jail space, the go to jail space, and free parking. You start the game with 1,500 Monopodollars and move by rolling dice. If you roll doubles, you get to move again, but if you roll doubles 3 times in a row, you go to jail. If you land on an unowned property, you can choose to buy it, but if you don't, instead it gets auctioned off where all players bid on the property and whoever has the highest bid gets the property. A lot of people don't play with this rule because it is kind of stupid, but due to Rule 4, we have to add it in. When you own a property, then other players will have to pay you money when they land on it, and you can upgrade your property with houses and hotels, provided you own the entire color group. Look, it's Monopoly. I don't have to explain everything to you. I just think it's important to establish our starting point, and therefore, what we're building off of. Now, let's talk about something more interesting, like Monopoly expansions! In 2025, Hasbro released what is essentially physical DLC for Monopoly. These each add a couple new mechanics, and I figured these would be a great first few games to add since they were literally made to be add-ons to regular Monopoly. The first one we'll be adding is the Free Parking Jackpot expansion. This one adds, if you can believe it, Free Parking Jackpot, which, if you don't know, actually has free parking do something. You see, if you owe money to the bank, like purchasing properties or landing on one of the tax spaces, you place it in the center of the board. Then, whenever someone lands on free parking, they get all of the money that was in the center of the board. Hence, Jackpot. And the free parking in the name comes from the fact that you land on free parking. It's very clever if you think about it. But that's not all that was added to this expansion, because if it was, you wouldn't need to buy an expansion for that. You could do that with any version of Monopoly. So they added a couple more things. Most notably, a spinner! Wow, look at that. You can spin the spinner when you land on the newly added spin space. The spin spaces are meant to replace the chance and community chest spaces, but because of Rule 3, we won't be replacing these spaces, instead adding the 6 spin spaces as separate spaces. You can also spin when you land on a property that you own and when you cash in a spin token. What's a spin token? Well, you get 2 of them when you start the game, and anytime a player lands on one of your properties, you can choose to take a spin token from the bank instead of collecting rent from the player. But what happens when you spin? Well, there's a 50% chance that you lose money, but you can also buy any one unowned property, get a free house, win the free parking jackpot, or get the Dealmobile. What's the Dealmobile? Well, aside from having the best name ever, you get the Dealmobile every time you land free parking jackpot, or when the spinner lands on the Dealmobile space. I just explained that to you. You then replace your token with the Dealmobile, and as the Dealmobile, you get 2 major advantages. You do not have to pay rent when landing on a property that another player owns, and if you land on any unowned property, you get it for free. Also, there's no turn limit for how many turns you can have the Dealmobile for, as you only lose it when you get sent to jail or another player gets the Dealmobile. When I first started on the Amalgopoly, I looked at this and thought, well, that seems a little overpowered, but after looking at everything else, This is child's play. Anyways, look at these bonus cards. Wow! Every time you spin the spinner or land on free parking, you get to draw a bonus card, which typically gives you some kind of, bonus, such as getting to move one more or one less space than what you rolled, swap a property you own with an unowned one from the bank, or just collect free parking jackpot altogether. When you get a bonus card, you keep them in your hand until you want to play them, which adds a bit of a strategic element to the game. And that's pretty much it. The only other thing this expansion changed was the win condition, which we will not be adapting due to
the universal rule.
After every game we add, I'll let you know how many spaces it adds to the Amalgopoly, so we can see this thing go from 40 spaces to 10,000 spaces in real time. The free parking expansion introduces 6 new spaces, all of them being spin spaces, meaning now we have 46 spaces total in the Amalgopoly. 1 expansion down, 2 to go. Now let's talk about the Buy Everything expansion. This expansion allows you to, get this, buy everything. You can buy Go. You can buy jail. You can buy Go to jail. You can buy free parking, the tax spaces, and even the chance and community chest card spaces. Also, I lied, you can't buy jail, but you can buy just visiting, which, close enough. Each of these new-ish properties function pretty much the same as normal properties. You can buy them when you land on them, and if you choose not to, it gets auctioned off. When another player lands on your property, then they pay you money, and the more properties of a certain group you own, then the more they pay you. For example, the 4 spaces that are on the corners are all part of the same group, meaning that if you own all 4, then players will pay more on each of those spaces. Income tax does function a little differently. Instead of paying a flat fee, you pay based on how many title deeds you own. 25 Monopoly if you only have income tax, or 50 if you also own luxury tax. The chance and community chest card spaces also function differently from normal properties. If you land on those, the person who owns the space draws 2 cards from the deck for you and then chooses which cards you get. They also do this when they land on the space, meaning that they'll probably give you the worst card when you land on it and the better card when they land on it. Also new from this expansion is the Sale Vault. At any given time, 3 cards are displayed in the Sale Vault available to buy. There are 3 card types available for purchase. The single-use card, where you play it whenever you want to and it gives you some kind of bonus, like being able to put a free house on any of your properties. These are essentially the bonus cards from free parking. There are also the ability cards, which give you a passive ability you have access to as long as you have the card, like owning all of the title deeds, and when someone wants to buy a property, they pay you instead of the bank. Then there are the insta-win cards, in which you essentially purchase win conditions. If you fulfill the conditions on the card, you just win the game. But we won't be adding these, though, due to
the universal rule.
Also, like I said before, most of these games change the win condition in some way, so unless there's something actually worth mentioning, I'm not going to bring it up every time. But when do you buy cards out of the Sale Vault, I hear you asking? Well, at the end of your turn, you roll the buy die. Terrible name, but regardless, if you roll this symbol, you can buy something. If you roll this symbol, you can force a player to discard one of their cards. And if you roll this symbol, you replace one of the cards for sale in the vault. That's pretty much everything this version has to offer. No new spaces, but some interesting new mechanics for sure. The final expansion is the Go to Jail expansion. Now what sets this expansion apart from the others? Nothing. We got more of these frickin' bonus cards. But now they're called corruption cards. Ooh! Every turn that you're in jail, you get to draw 1 corruption card and add it to your hand, which are just like the previous bonus cards, but with a more devious edge to them. Hence, corruption. You can also draw a corruption card when you land on or pass jail. When you land on just visiting. Not when you do get one when you go to jail, but also when you land on just visiting. You get what I'm saying. I'm rambling. I might cut that out. No, I'm gonna keep it in. Not enough jail in this jail expansion? Don't worry, because we got Jail 2! Super Jail is connected to the standard Go to Jail space, and you can only be sent to Super Jail if a player uses a corruption card that sends you to Super Jail. Whilst you are in Super Jail, you can draw super corruption cards, but to get out of Super Jail, you must either pay the person who sent you there 300 Monopoly, or give them all the super corruption cards you collected during your stay. Also, super corruption cards are just like corruption cards, but they're better. I wasn't sure if I needed to explain that, but I figured I might as well. Also, for both jail and super jail, you can only stay there for 3 turns before the game forces you to get out, which prevents you from just farming corruption cards for dozens of turns. There are some weird changes this expansion makes, though. Like, you don't go to jail if you roll doubles 3 times in a row like you did before. Doesn't that go against the whole point of this expansion? That being going to jail multiple times? Also, you can't roll doubles to get out of jail or super jail. Doing that for super jail makes sense. It's super and therefore harder to get out of, but it just feels weird to do that for regular jail. I guess the point is that you don't have to leave if you don't want to, so you can get more corruption cards, but why not just have the option to just not attempt to roll doubles so you can stay there longer? So I'm going to be keeping the triple doubles rule from regular Monopoly and just saying that you don't have to try to roll doubles whilst in jail. I know some people might say that this goes against Rule 4, but this new mechanic this expansion introduced is really just the removal of other mechanics. So if anything, I'm adding more stuff by not including things from this expansion. The final thing this expansion changes is how the chance and community chest spaces work. You don't draw a card from these spaces anymore. Instead, you roll a die and do what it says. If you land on a chance space, you either have a chance to draw a corruption card or go to jail. And when you land on a community chest space, you have a chance to either get some money or go to jail. Because these function so differently from the usual chance community chest spaces, I'll have to add these as separate spaces to the Amalgopoly, as corruption spaces and heist spaces. Name's not finalized. Making for 6 new spaces, bringing our total up to 52. Now, before we move on from these expansions, you might be thinking, all these expansions have a pretty similar bonus card mechanic. Would it be possible to combine them in some way? Probably. That's a phase 2 kind of question. Alright, let's move on to something a little more interesting. Introducing Monopoly, the Mega Edition. I bet you can't tell what they changed with this version. That's right! They added a 3rd utility! I hope all the Utilities fans are happy because there's a pretty good chance this is all the love you're getting during this project. So there's more properties in this version. Each color group gets 1 additional properties, so most now have 4 properties, with the browns and the dark blues having 3. There are also a couple more spaces, like the aforementioned 3rd utility, but also the auction space. When a player lands on this space, they choose an unowned property, which then gets auctioned off to all players. But if all properties are owned, when a player lands on the space, they then move to the property on which they'll have to pay the highest rent. Okay. I feel like they could just make it so that you don't do anything, but that's what the rules say, so sure, we'll have that in the game. Then there's the bus ticket space. When you land on this space, you draw a bus ticket. What's a bus ticket do? Well, you can play a bus ticket to move to any space that is on the same side of the board as you are, but once you use it, it is permanently discarded, so once they're gone, they're gone. But within the deck of bus tickets lies a couple of these cards, which force all players to discard any bus tickets they have, which is just really petty. I kinda love it. The final new space is the birthday space. When you land on this space, you can choose to either receive 100 Monopoly from the bank or draw a bus ticket. Not enough Mega in your Monopoly? How about we throw in a 3rd die? Okay, technically this is the 6th die we've added to the Amalgopoly, but this is the 3rd movement-based die, so it still counts. Whenever you move, you also roll this die, the speed die, along with the 2 standard dice. If you roll a bus ticket on the speed die, draw a bus ticket. Unless all the bus tickets are out, then you move to the nearest chance/community chest card space after your standard turn. If you roll a Mr. Monopoly face, then you do your normal turn, but then move to the next unowned property. Unless all the properties are owned, then you just move to the next property where you have to pay rent. If you land on one of the standard numbered die spaces, of which you can either roll a 1, 2, or 3, you just add that number to your roll, and if you ever roll triples, you can move to any space on the board. The final thing we're adding for Mega Monopoly are the train depots. These are essentially houses that you can place on the railroads. They cost 100 Monopoly and double the rent on the railroads you place them on. Alright, that's everything from Mega Monopoly. It added 12 new spaces, meaning the Amalgopoly now has 64 total spaces. Now, this game also added some new mechanics when it came to building houses and hotels on your regular properties, but I didn't really want to spend time talking about that, given that these mechanics are all going to be usurped by our next game, Monopoly City. This game completely overhauls the building mechanics of regular Monopoly, creating something that's pretty complicated, but I'll try my best to explain everything. First of all, Houses and hotels are dead. This game killed them and danced on their graves. Now we have residential buildings and industrial buildings. Each property kind of has this space where you can build these, but you're only limited to 8 blocks per property. What's a block? Well, nearly every single building has a certain block value, and depending on how many of these blocks are built on a property, the higher the rent is for that property. But how many blocks you can build on your turn is limited by this thing, the trading unit. Every time you want to build, you press a button on this thing, some lights start blinking, and it gives you a number. That's how many blocks you can build. Or the trading unit can roll the railroad symbol, which lets you build a railroad for free on one of your properties. When you land on a property that has a railroad, not to be confused with a railroad property, you can choose to move to the next property that has a railroad on it. Okay, so these names are pretty confusing, so I'm making the executive decision to rename the railroads you can build on your property in Monopoly City to subways. These are subways, these are railroads. Not to be confused with Subway Monopoly, a game that doesn't exist and I just made up. Also, from what I've heard about this game, the trading unit is kinda stupid and people don't usually like playing with it, but Rule 4 says we have to add it. Okay, back to talking about these residential and industrial buildings. Residential buildings are cheaper than industrial buildings, but the trade-off is that if there's a hazard in your district, residential buildings are nullified. What are hazards? They're buildings you can build in other players' districts to negate their residential buildings. Hazards also have a block value, meaning these also take up space in the properties you build them in. You can only build these hazards when you land on the planning permission space, but you can also choose to build a bonus building on your property instead. A bonus building prevents a hazard from being built on your property, with each bonus building preventing a different hazard from being built. Also, something that I haven't mentioned yet is that unlike normal Monopoly, you don't need to own all the properties in a color group to begin building. If you own just one property, you can start building. But there is still a point to buying out color groups with these next 3 buildings. If you own 2 properties the same color, you can build a stadium, which doesn't increase your rent value, but you do get an extra 100 Monopoly dollars every time you pass go. There's only 2 of them though, so you gotta get them quick. If you own an entire color group, you can build a skyscraper, which doubles rent for all properties in the color group. And if you own 2 color groups, you can build the Monopoly Tower, which doubles the rent for all of your properties. Which means that if you own the highest value property in this game, build 8 blocks of residential or industrial buildings on it, and you have a skyscraper in the color group, and a Monopoly Tower built, the rent for that property will be 8,000 Monopoly dollars. 8,000! Do you understand how many Monopoly dollars that is? You start Monopoly with 1,500 Monopoly dollars, and if you manage to avoid any event in which you lose money, you would have to go around the board 33 times in order to get enough money from passing go. That's 1,320 spaces you would have to travel. That is the insanity that I wanted from this project, and we're only 5 games in. One more thing from this game. Every time you land on free parking, you get the rent dodge card, which you use when you land on another player's property to get this dodge rent, but you can only use it once. There's only one of these cards, and if someone lands on free parking before you use it, that player just takes it, and you lost your chance. I'm not gonna add this mechanic, mainly because the Dealmobile exists, and it accomplishes the same thing as this card does, but better, and with a much better name. So, there's not really a point to adding it. That's it for Monopoly City. The only spaces we're adding are the 4 planning permission spaces, bringing our total up to 68, but we sure added a lot of crap from this version, didn't we? Also, something to keep in mind from this point onwards, that because houses and hotels have been replaced, if any Monopoly game ever mentions something about building houses or hotels, it'll instead be about building buildings. For example, in the free parking expansion, one of the rewards for the spinner was being able to build a free house, but now if the spinner lands on that, you will instead use the trading unit to see how many blocks you can build and then build a building worth however many blocks it landed on for free. Does that make any sense? I hope it does. Anyways, here's a much easier game we can implement. It's Miss Monopoly. So in an effort to empower women, Miss Monopoly gives them an advantage by introducing the wage gap. When a man plays this game, they start with the standard 1,500 Monopoly dollars and earn 200 every time they pass go. But when women play this game, they start with 1,900 Monopoly and earn 240 every time they pass go. Also, there are no rules for what to do if you're non-binary. I'm just going to chuck in a rule of my own that if you don't identify as male or female, then you start with 1,700 Monopoly and earn 220 every time you pass go. Now, pretty much everyone agrees that this mechanic is really dumb. It's the main reason that this version of Monopoly is so infamous and not in a good way. However, it's an official mechanic and an official version of Monopoly that we can implement without issue, so it gets added to the Amalgopoly. I'm not happy about it either. The only other thing this version adds is the rideshare space. When you land on this space, you move ahead to the next rideshare space. How exciting. We'll add 4 of those to the board, meaning we've now got 72 spaces. Okay, let's move on to something a little bit more exciting. Monopoly for sore losers. In this game, every time something bad happens to you, like having to pay rent, going to jail, or landing on your own property, that doesn't really fit the theme, but okay, you get a sore loser token. You can only have 4 of these sore loser tokens at a time, but once you have 4, you can cash them in to become the big man. Okay, technically it's just called Mr. Monopoly, but I'm calling it the big man, because that is one big man. As the big man, you get a fairly overpowered set of abilities. You can never get sent to jail. When you have to pay rent to another player, they instead pay you. If you land on a tax space, you collect that much money instead, and anytime anyone rolls doubles, you get to build a free building. And you can only stop being the big man whenever another player cashes their sore loser tokens in to become the big man. Now you might be thinking, a transformation with an overpowered set of abilities and 0 turn limits? This sounds kind of similar to the Dealmobile from the free parking Jackpot. Could we combine these mechanics somehow? And yeah, there's a good chance I'm gonna have to figure something out regarding these two. At the very least, we'll have to change something about how these two mechanics work, especially since the big man is way better than the Dealmobile despite being much easier to actually get. I think I'll either switch their abilities to align better with the requirements to get them, or just toss out the Dealmobile altogether and say that when you get free parking Jackpot, you get to become the big man. That's the only thing this game really adds. So Monopoly for sore losers adds 0 new spaces, just 1 big man. But if you're looking for a Monopoly version that'll add a bunch of spaces, look no further than Monopoly Empire. This game replaces all of the property names with real-world brands, and I just gotta ask, do you think that the brands that are worth more in-game paid more money to be in this game? Like, did Skype drop a clean 100 grand to be part of the Dark Blues? I mean, these are surely product placement, especially since the end of the instruction manual talks about how incredible all of these products are. So if it's product placement, then they surely paid to be in the game, and therefore, are the ones that are worth more, did they pay more? You know? Also, there are apparently 2 different versions of this game. This one came out in 2015, but I also found this one with different brands. I couldn't find exactly when this one was made, but given the logos of both Spotify and Yahoo, I guess I'd say around 2013 or 2012. And what strings did Beats by Dre pull to go from a light blue in the 2013 version to the boardwalk of the 2015 version? How much money did you pay Hasbro for this? Huh? Dre, you gonna answer me? Speaking of Hasbro, why are they one of the pink properties? You literally made this game. Why not make yourself the highest value property as some self-promotion? If you or anyone you know was involved in the brand integration of Monopoly Empire, leave a comment down below. I am desperate for information. And while you're down there, smash that subscribe button. Anyways, none of this actually has anything to do with how we're going to implement this into the Amalgopoly. I just wanted to talk about it. So, this game changes how the rent system works. Every player gets this tower, and when they buy a property, they take a billboard and add it to the tower. The number that your tower reaches is then the rent for all of your properties. Also, the properties that cost more to buy have larger billboards, meaning they increase the rent by more. By the way, I will hence be referring to the size of the billboard as how many tiles it is worth. If you collect a full color group, you then get to add an office to your tower worth 1 tile, which gives it a little extra height, or you can buy one on your own turn for 500 Monopoly. Once your tower reaches maximum height, you win the game. Now, this is an interesting game to implement. Obviously, the main gimmick of this game is the new rent system, but we can't just have that replace how rent usually works. especially since there's no building mechanic in Empire, meaning we'd have to find some way to fit the rent mechanic from Empire and the building mechanics from City together. But there is a solution that makes this thing easier. We add the Empire properties while also keeping the normal properties. Now, when you buy an Empire property, you add its billboard to your tower, which determines the rent for only your Empire properties. Your normal properties will just have whatever rent is written on the card. Now, this does involve adding 22 of these Empire properties, which I know sounds extreme, but hear me out. In Standard Monopoly, there are 28 properties and 40 total spaces, meaning that 70% of the board is made up of properties. At this point, the Amalgopoly has 72 spaces, with only 43 of those spaces being properties you can purchase, meaning that 60% of the board is made up of properties. Therefore, the ratio of properties to non-properties are skewed more towards non-properties than what they were in Standard Monopoly. The way to remedy this is by adding more properties, which Empire gives an excellent opportunity to do so. So we add the 22 Empire properties, meaning we now have 94 spaces and 65 properties, changing our proportion of properties to 69%. That's damn near the exact ratio of normal Monopoly, so there really isn't a problem with doing this. Aside from, well, inflating the number of spaces and making the board way bigger, but that's going to be bound to happen anyways. There are just a few more things I gotta mention regarding this game, the first one being the maximum height of the tower. Like I mentioned before, when you had reached the max height of your tower, you won the game, so you didn't need to worry about exceeding the max height. However, due to
The universal rule.
we cannot have this win condition, so what if a player wants to buy a new Empire property, but their tower is already full? The solution is fairly obvious. We just increase the heights of the towers, but how high do we make the towers? Well, because it is technically possible to own every single Empire property in the game, the height of the tower should be able to fit the maximum number of tiles you can get, being 63 tiles, which is over 3.5 times the size of the tower in normal Monopoly Empire. Also, because the height of your tower affects the rent of your properties, if we keep a consistent rate of one tile increases rent by 50 Monopodollars, your maximum rent can be 3,150 Monopodollars for every single Empire property, all 22. That is delicious. More chaos, more destruction. Your game balance is meaningless. You will all succumb to BS game mechanics. There are these new Empire cards that replace Community Chest, where, like the bonus cards from the expansions, you hold on to them and play them on your turn when it's like strategic or whatever. I think I should be able to just have these Empire cards kind of just shuffled into the bonus cards from like Free Parking expansion or the Buy Everything expansion, so we don't need to add spaces for them. Emphasis on I think, because I don't have a complete list of what all the cards are and what they do. That actually goes for essentially every game I've mentioned so far, such as the bonus cards from Free Parking Jackpot, sale cards from Buy Everything, corruption and super corruption cards from Go to Jail, these Empire cards, and any additional chance or community chest cards from any version that I've mentioned so far. This is a little bit annoying because if I'm actually going to make the Amalgopoly a real thing, I'll need a list of all these cards to properly implement all of these games. And maybe I just don't know where to look, but I just can't get a complete list of these cards for most of these games. Not even the fan wikis have a list. What's the point of a fan wiki if it doesn't have every single piece of information about an incredibly niche subject? You failed me, Monopoly Fan Wiki, you failed me! So if you've got any information about the cards featured in any Monopoly version I've mentioned, let me know. I guess I could also just, like, go buy these games and yeah, but buying things for losers. Okay, we are almost done with Empire, I swear. There's an additional face on one of the dice called the Sneaky Swapper, where if you roll it, you have the option of switching the topmost billboard of your tower with an opponent's of your choice. We can smack that onto the speed die from Monopoly, the Mega Edition, as that only had 5 unique phases, meaning we now have a perfect 6 for a d6. There are the tower attacks and the rival tower attack spaces, where if you land on the former, you return your topmost billboard to the board, but if you land on the latter, you choose an opponent to do that instead. 2 new spaces bring our total count up to 96. Finally, When you pass go in this game, you don't get 200 Monopoly, but rather, you get Monopoly equivalent to the height of your tower, the same as rent. This is actually an excellent opportunity to add a second go space. Because we're adding so many spaces, it's now taking longer to get around the board and longer to get the 200 Monopoly from passing go. Therefore, adding a second go space means that the players get more money more often, preventing anyone from going bankrupt too early into the game. At least in theory. I have no idea how any of this will work. We're finally done with Monopoly Empire. It added 25 new spaces, bringing our total up to 95. This game has now added the most number of spaces to the Amalgopoly, except for normal Monopoly, technically. Now there's no way the next game could be even more complicated and take even longer to talk about. Right? God, I hope I'm right. Our next game will be Monopoly Gamer. Well, for some reason there are multiple games called Monopoly Gamer, despite being about different games. But we're talking about the one with Mario, okay? All right. Monopoly Gamer, parentheses, Mario, asterisk, the original Monopoly Gamer, parentheses, I think, okay? We're all clear on that. Okay, let's talk about the new spaces that this game adds. The first new one is the warp pipe space. When you land on this space, you move to the next warp pipe space on the board. However, we already added the space that does this, the rideshare spaces from Miss Monopoly. But even though they do the same thing, I am gonna replace the rideshare spaces with warp pipe spaces. There's not a real reason behind this. I just think Mario pipes are more fun than Ubers. Next up is the coin block space. When you land on this space, you roll a numbered die and collect that many coin from the bank. Now you're probably asking, wait, coins? Not Monopoly? Yeah, this game switched out the standard Monopoly currency for coins. Coins function as the standard currency for this game, but because I want to have one centralized currency for the Amalgopoly, I'll be figuring out the exchange rate for coins after I finish talking about everything else in this game. There are only 2 coin block spaces in Monopoly Gamer, so we'll chuck 2 of those in. Our next new space is the Thwomp space, of which there are 2 of, where when you land on it, you drop 2 coins onto the space. Note how I didn't say you lose 2 coins. In Monopoly Gamer, you can drop coins onto a space, which remain there until a player passes on or lands on that space, in which they collect those coins. The final new space is the Superstar space, and when you land on here, you activate your character's special ability. Because Monopoly Gamer introduced playable characters with distinct abilities from one another. There are 4 playable characters, and their superstar abilities are as follows. Mario, roll a numbered die and collect 1d6 plus 5 coins from the bank. Peach, collect rent from the bank from each property you own. Which, in this game, is somewhat balanced considering the maximum rent for a property is only 10 coins, but given some other things we've spoken about regarding rent in the Amalgopoly, I might have to nerf this one, just a little bit. Yoshi, collect all coins that have been dropped on the board. Donkey Kong, steal 3 coins from another player. Wait, that's it? Mario is guaranteed to get at least 6 coins from his superstar ability, but DK only gets 3? I feel like these abilities weren't really created equally. Alright, those are all the new spaces from this game. We've added 8 new spaces, meaning we're now at a frustratingly prime 103 spaces. But we're not out of the woods yet. Monopoly Gamer also adds the power-up die, which you roll along with the movement die. You can choose to activate the power-up die's ability before or after you move. But what do all the power-ups do? Well, when you roll the coins, you collect 3 coins from the bank. Unless you're playing as Mario, in which you collect 4. Because each character also has a secondary ability in which one power-up is buffed for them specifically. When you roll the green shell, the closest player in front of you on the board drops 3 coins, but if you're playing as Yoshi, you can also choose to hit the closest player behind you instead. When you roll the red shell, you can choose one player to drop 3 coins, unless you're playing as Peach, in which they drop 4 coins. If you roll the POW block, all players drop 1 coin on the space they're on, unless you're playing as DK, in which they drop 2. If you roll the blooper, you steal 2 coins from a player of your choice, unless you're playing as... Oh, that's all the characters. This one is the same for everyone. Cool. The last big change from this game are the bosses. Every time you pass go, you get the opportunity to fight a boss. You have to pay a certain number of coins to attempt to fight a boss, and you have to roll a d6 to determine if you win. When you defeat a boss, you get a certain number of points, which are the metric for determining the winner of the game. However, because of
the universal rule,
points would be kinda pointless in the Amalgopoly, so you'll get some money instead, and I'll decide how much money each boss gives out at the end of the segment. You also get an additional little perk, like when you defeat Roy Koopa, you can send a player of your choice to free parking?
What?
Why would you want to do this? Wouldn't sending them to jail make more sense? And when you factor in the Amalgopoly, you definitely don't want to send any players to free parking in this game. So I'm going to change this one to send one player to jail. Everything else is pretty much fine though. As you fight the bosses, they get stronger, requiring higher rolls to beat, higher costs to challenge, and better prizes when you win. Here's a big ol' spreadsheet of all that information for the first 7 bosses. I ain't talking about all this garbage. I will briefly talk about Bowser, though. Instead of paying the bank when you challenge him, you add it to a pot, and every time you lose against him, you add even more money to the pot. Once a player finally defeats Bowser, they get all of the money that was in that pot, just like free parking Jackpot. Alright, that's pretty much it for this game. All we gotta do now is figure out the exchange rate for Mario coins to Monopoly dollars. I thought about doing some math to figure it out, like comparing the costs of different events in each game, but that turned out to be pretty inconsistent with the values I would end up with, so I decided to go with the more tried and true method. Vibes. I am now declaring that a Mario coin is worth 50 Monopoly dollars, which I think is a significant amount to the point where it doesn't feel trivial, but it's also not too much to where if you lose money from like a power-up, you don't immediately lose the game. Furthermore, I think I'll say that every 10 points is worth 100 Monopoly dollars, which I think gives every boss a pretty good payout for their cost. There's a pretty good chance I'll end up changing some of these values as time goes on, but for now, this is what we're going with. So that's everything for this game, right? Ha! Nope! Because there's also Monopoly Gamer Collector's Edition! This demotes Bowser from final boss to playable character, with his son now taking up the role of the final boss. He's the same gameplay-wise, though, so I don't need to talk about that. But along with Bowser as a new playable character, they also added 8 other playable characters! They more than tripled the number of playable characters in the Collector's Edition. Look, I'm not reading all these abilities, alright? I already spent 5 pages talking about this game. Here they all are on their screen with their abilities. If there's an issue with any of them, we can talk about it in Phase 2. Okay, so I know that this script and probably this video is already way too long, but I want to end this video by adding a clean 10 games. Okay, technically we already added 10 because we added base Monopoly. Actually, we added 11 because we added both Monopoly Gamer and Monopoly Gamer Collector's Edition. But I want to add this one. We're adding 10 with an asterisk. Our final game for this video will be Monopoly Scrabble. In this game, the dice have been thrown out the window. Instead, you move via the Scrabble board. Let me explain how this works. So, the board is set up like this. My opponent has played the word kale. Now, I play the word Quidgibo off of kale. That would score me 22 points in a game of Scrabble. But in this game, it moves me 22 spaces on the board. Also, note that I covered up this brown color group space. Well, when you play a letter tile onto one of those spaces, you then own that property in the game. And if another player plays a letter tile onto a property space that another player already owns, they steal that property. So how do we implement this into the Amalgopoly? We can't just replace the dice, they're too integral. And we can't just say, oh, buying properties is gone now. Now you just get them with the Scrabble. That would be dumb. I think what I'll do instead is just give players the option to move via Scrabble. I'll also give us some kind of disadvantage by saying that you can't use additional dice when you move via Scrabble, like the buy and the power-up dice from Buy Everything and Gamer, respectively. And I'll also add each of these Scrabble properties as separate properties, where you don't buy them, you get them via the Scrabble board, like Monopoly Scrabble, the game we're talking about. Also, when you eventually run out of Scrabble tiles, you can no longer use this option, meaning there's a finite amount of Scrabbling that you can do in this game. If it's still too overpowered, I might end up adding a cost to moving via Scrabble, like having to pay 100 Monopoly dollars to do so, or something like that. In terms of the spaces we're adding, each color group only has one property, so 8 of those, but also there are 4 railroad spaces and 2 utility spaces, meaning this game has introduced 14 total spaces, bringing our final count up to 117 for this video. Just a couple more things for this version. You have to pay to replace your Scrabble tiles in this version, $100 Monopoly for each replacement, as opposed to normal Scrabble, where you can just say, I don't want these, and then get new ones. And if you use all of your Scrabble tiles in one turn, you get to choose any property currently not owned by a player and get it for free, and you also get 1,000 Monopoly because why not? I think the reason I wanted to add this game as the final game of part 1 is just because it's really funny that to make the game that combines every Monopoly, we also need to add Scrabble. Like, just an entire game of Scrabble. And thus, we have closed the book on part 1 of the Amalgopoly. And here is a recap of the size of the game so far. 117 total spaces made up of 30 standard property spaces, 22 empire properties, 14 Scrabble properties, 4 railroads, 3 utilities, 6 spin spaces, 4 tax spaces, 2 ghost spaces, 4 Mario pipes, 20 other spaces I don't feel like naming, 7 dice, 7 different decks of cards, 7 Koopalings, plus Bowser Jr. making for 8 total bosses, 13 selectable characters, a trading unit, a deal mobile, a big man, a wage gap, and an entire game of Scrabble. First take, baby! And that's only from part 1. Also, here's a rough layout of the board. But by the way, do you guys like this logo? I think it's pretty cool. I drew it myself. In the description of this video, there will be links to the instructions for all the games I've covered so far, so you can tell me all about the stupid mistakes I've made. But I could only find the Miss Monopoly instructions in German, so I also left a link for Google Translate. And as a reminder, also in the description, there will be a link to Massacre's Mansion, big old series about the Uno Amalgam, which you should watch if you liked this video. If you have any Monopoly versions you want to see get added to the Amalgopoly, comment them down below. I'd honestly really love some ideas on where to go next. And of course, you should smash that subscribe button. Or don't. I don't really care. Bye.